Five is a podcast about music where on each episode, my guest selects 5 pieces that are in whatever way influencing their musical practice. We listen to each one and discuss why and how they stand out. My guest for episode 9 is Palm. Palm is a 4-piece art rock ensemble formed in upstate New York in 2012. As a completely collaborative effort in every part of the music-making process, the quartet has developed a truly characteristic sound, recognized by its constant time signature changes, off-kilter guitar timbres, and vocal effects. For this episode, guitarist and vocalist Kasra Kurt, guitarist and vocalist Eve Alpert, bassist Gerasimos Livitsanos, and drummer Hugo Stanley each selected one piece that best defined their own state of mind, musically and creatively at the moment. For the 5th piece, the band selected one song, Together, that collectively stood out. Palm has been touring nearly non-stop since the release of their last album, Rock Island, earlier this year on Car Park Records. The New York Times called Palm one of the most ambitious and promising acts in today's art rock scene. Without further ado, my conversation with Palm. This is the 5 podcast. I'm your host, Ross Wallace-Chait, and today I am speaking to my friends in the band Palm. How's LA treating you so far?
We're doing well. We just landed a few hours ago from Philadelphia to LAX at 12. And then we got some Korean barbecue and picked up an amp from a friend who's lending their amp to us for our show tomorrow.
Cool. So, what's up with the band right now? You have these shows here, and then you said a short European run later in the fall.
And, we're going to Europe in October. Before that, we have maybe like 5-6 shows in like the East Coast in Canada, and we have a couple shows in Chicago in like a week.
Cool.
But kind of winding down our touring for a while.
When did the second album come out?
February 9th.
And it's kind of hasn't wound down at all since then.
Not really.
Yeah.
We did a lot of touring this year. And now we want to go home and write music.
And make a 3rd album.
Yeah.
Something I really appreciate about your band is that every time I've seen you on a different tour cycle, the performance, not just like playing different songs, but the whole kind of presentation and performance of the music seems very unique each time. Like different instrumentation slightly, and sort of just a different performativeness that seems to really evolve each time, which makes it exciting to see the show.
That's cool that you feel that way. I think historically we've been very easy. We've always wanted to do something different when we play a show, or make it different when we do a tour, and play new songs before they're finished.
Right.
And I think that's like always our goal, because it can be pretty exhausting to play the same music or the same set over and over again. So yeah, every time we go home, I'm personally always thinking of like how we can, if we're not able to come up with new music, or if it's not ready, I'm always trying to think about how we can make the current songs more interesting, or what can we add to make it sound just sonically better. So I don't know, when we have time to do that, so why not?
Right. Yeah, totally. And it's cool because that seems like it must be a very distinct process from actual music writing, you know, just kind of like taking something that is very, very familiar to you and revamping it with like flourishes and details and stuff like that.
Yeah, or taking stuff away,
Mm-hmm.
or adding some sort of amp to help separate the sounds. Or, you know, I don't know, it's just very refreshing for us to even do the slightest change to a song or to a set, as I'm sure it is for a lot of musicians.
Yeah. And have you noticed people coming out to the shows more and like being able to engage with people in a different way after the last album came out?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, made a difference, I think. I don't think any of us ever expected to be flying out for shows or anything like that, so that's still new and playing bigger rooms. And,
Yeah.
We meet people who've come to like consecutive shows,
Yeah.
which is strange. Like 3 in a row or something.
Really?
Yeah, people who've driven further than
Even on the West Coast?
they're
more on the East Coast, but yeah.
But it does happen on the West Coast too. Sometimes it'll be funny. I feel like we'll maybe like drive a long way, and maybe like some of us will be like in a bad mood for being in the car all day or something, and then someone will be at the show who like voluntarily drove even further away. And that always like
You can't feel
humbling.
Yeah,
and
you
confusing.
can't take pity on yourself anymore when someone else is doing it like that.
But yeah, it's hard to talk about, I guess. I don't know. Like, I don't know. We love the album, and I think people like those songs as well. So
Yeah.
it's cool to hear people like recognize a song before it started. Or
Yeah.
I think we made an effort, maybe not totally consciously, but I think we made an effort like pretty early on to kind of like set a precedent for being open to changing things, just like not only like stylistically, but also just like, I guess like what you guys were talking about before with like the presentation and stuff. And so I think maybe we've like set up something of like an expectation that like the show will be different to the previous time,
Right.
which is like, it's like really fun for us to keep it interesting in that way, but it's also like a bit of a challenge, I guess, because it's like it makes it harder and harder to want to kind of like, you know, like rest on our laurels and like play the same stuff, but just like as we've sort of like assimilated into the kind of album cycle, kind of like way that things seem to work in the music business, it's kind of like our process has sort of been like, just like it's kind of like messed with how like our timing of things, you know what I mean? Like
You mean your ability to go home and sort of freshen things up as frequently as you would like to?
well, you can't like play a new song every few shows like how we did for the first like few years of being a band when you tour in support of an album for like more than a year, you know? It's just like, not only do you not have the time anymore to write that much, but it's like you can't be like 2 albums ahead in terms of like the material that you have, and like have people coming out expecting to hear certain songs. I mean, I guess you can, and some people do, and get away with it, and it's cool, but I guess like we want the shows to be fun for people who are open to hearing things they've never heard before, but also to people who, you know, want to go to a show and see a band like play certain songs that they want to hear. And so it's like you kind of have to juggle the, I guess, just like the expectations of your audience and stuff with like your own creative needs. So that's been a process.
I think we also have a higher expectation of also like what we want to show, maybe. Not to say that we wouldn't show something or perform something brand new or unfinished, but I think we're maybe more sensitive to like perfecting a song before we show.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, Palm is such a there are very few like extra musical factors, you know, about just fans of the band or are fans of the music, and it's not something that's wrapped up in like overly wrapped up in an image or personality cult or anything like that. So yeah, you know, it's sort of unique to see an act like that nowadays, like find themselves on the path that you guys are on, and it's very cool and inspiring, but I can also see how there would be like challenges in graduating to that world where you're sort of just like on the road constantly playing the same material constantly and having less time to sort of maybe do things exactly your way.
Yeah. I think going back to what you were saying about changing material or things like that, I think if anything, it's less that we sit down and change the materials and more that we leave space for like freedom.
Sure.
And allow each other and ourselves to do things differently, and that makes touring much more bearable for me because it doesn't feel like I'm just like redoing something as it is on the album, but that there's space for like expression. And for that same reason, I feel like we kind of lack a pro edge that so many bands have when they tour that much and they play everything great every night. Like we were saying that sometimes people drive far, like a long way to see us, and sometimes they do that and they'll tell me once we played, and I'll be like, damn, like we were like really like in a weird mood tonight, and like it was like came out in our performance in some way.
So you mean they're like improvisational blocks in the songs or between songs and stuff like that sort of is hit or miss depending on the night?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then like even like tempos and things like that, like I feel like sometimes we just play the material really different, and we've toured with so many bands who are able to just do everything like so on precisely every night, and I think I enjoy that Palm isn't like that, but
I think the people who are fans of the band enjoy that too.
I hope so. You never know if you're gonna see a good show or a bad one.
Well, now we're being really mean to ourselves.
I think maybe we just like I don't want to like speak for everyone, but it's at least my impression that maybe we all have kind of a tendency to get bored easily or something, or at least like get bored more quickly with things than sort of like the schedule that we found ourselves in
is placed
it
upon
allows.
you,
Yeah. So it's like I would rather, you know, not have every show be like solidly average, like no more, no less focused or realized than the previous show. I'd rather, you know, like sometimes like try something and kind of like eat shit than like be bored, I guess. And I think that I think at least it's the hope that it like makes us also less boring to other people, you know. But it's like the other thing that we have to sometimes remind ourselves, I think, is that like we're the only people seeing ourselves every night like perform, you know. So like for someone, you know, every time we're in this headspace of like, oh, we've been like touring on these same songs for like 6 months or a year or whatever, it's like the people at the shows every night, it's probably the only Palm show they've been to that year, so like it doesn't make as much of a difference to them. But I think that kind of like impulse that we have is also like that like at least sometimes like works out for us, or like enables us to kind of keep it moving in a way that I think people appreciate.
Right.
Some people.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, that gives me high expectations for the gig tomorrow night.
No.
Well, you've seen us play a lot of times. So.
Yeah, I have. And it's funny, I was talking to somebody else who's really familiar with your music recently, and just speculating about whether there are sort of little chunks where you guys don't know exactly what's going to happen, and it sort of changes every night. So the compliment in that not knowingness is that whatever you are doing, whether you guys think it's working or not, it seems like it's supposed to be happening.
Yeah, there are definitely times too which I take a certain amount of solace in, I guess. Maybe that's not the right word, but it's a relief to me sometimes to have played a set earlier in the night and think of specific moments where I was like, we didn't really know what we were doing there, and then maybe someone will like tag us in a video like on the internet or something, and I'll hear it and I'll be like, oh, that sounded okay.
Yeah.
It sounded a lot different than it felt.
Right.
Or something, which is like, it's weird, sort of like the desire or the need or whatever to like hear yourself or like hear what you're doing, like not while you're doing it, but it's like, I think for anything that you want to like get better at, whether it's music or art or like sports or something, it's like, it's important to like have a way to like go outside your own body and see what you're doing actually looks or sounds like, you know, because it's just like, it's impossible to like be an observer in something while you're making it, and like, so it's impossible to like be able to like analyze it critically with like a totally sort of like uninhibited or unbiased perspective.
Yeah, and I also feel like the nature of touring is so repetitive and so draining in a lot of ways that you kind of, on stage, you lose touch a little bit with, does this feel right? Does this feel good? And it's usually better than you're giving yourself credit for when you're like worn down by playing a show every night for however long.
Definitely. You know? It's definitely like, it's more forgiving than you think it is, but at the same time, like when you're like really in the zone and everything like feels really right, I think that like comes across as well. And
Definitely.
So it's like, it's all about like figuring out how to like tap into that, or like let that state sort of like happen to you, and like being open to it or something.
Yeah, definitely.
And not so serious.
Yeah.
All the time.
Yeah.
Take it seriously. Yeah.
So each one of you picked your individual track, and then we will end with the group track. And I would like to start with Kasra's song. So let's listen to it. was Graham Miller and Steve Shill's Woodland Band song from the Moomins album. It's a soundtrack, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the program was a European animated sort of fairy tale program type of thing. Have you seen it?
No, I haven't seen it. I don't know the show. I have no idea who the people who made the music are or anything like that. My friend and housemate April is a fan of the show, and has spoken highly of it, and I've always intended to see it. And then my other friend and housemate Ada showed me the soundtrack, and I fell in love with it. And yeah, I don't know anything about it. I don't know anything about the people, but maybe that kind of adds to my enjoyment of the music.
Well, I guess in that case I'll ruin a little bit of your enjoyment of the music by telling you it was a German TV show from 1982, and the two composers both came from Leeds, England, and they lived in a home together, and they recorded and wrote this album at their home in Leeds. And they both came from a theatrical rather than a musical background. And they were really interested in early synthesizer and early sampler music from Europe, like Kraftwerk and other British stuff of that era. And they made this album. They then went on, one of them became a producer of HBO television programs.
Really? I've tried to find other music by them and haven't been successful.
Yeah, I think the other guy, Miller, made some music, but Steve Schill, as far as I know, just did this album and then went into TV and is super successful, like award-winning television producer.
No way.
Guy. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, maybe that does take away a little bit.
Even just not being familiar with this song until you showed it to me, after listening to it, after being really engaged with it, it was a little sad to realize that this guy then became like a hotshot
TV guy.
Yeah.
No disrespect to TV, though.
But yeah, the song is really, really beautiful. And the flute, I guess, whatever that instrument is at the front, the performance is so like right in between very virtuosic and sort of just like a little kid talent show or something.
Yeah, totally.
In a way that is really, really engaging.
Yeah, I love it. I was really struggling to choose a track
Mm-hmm.
for this, and I just went with the track that I've listened to the most
Mm-hmm.
for a while now. And yeah, I love it. I find it to be so moving and adaptable to whatever mood I'm in,
Yeah.
and really like sentimental. Yeah, and like I love the sounds. I love that I don't know what is acoustic and what's
Right.
like synthesized.
Yeah.
And I love that it sounds like it was made in kind of one day. Yeah, it's like a lullaby or something.
Very much. Yeah.
And I find that recently, a lot of what I'm interested in listening to and making is kind of lullaby-esque in that way, like simple and sentimental in a kind of like two-dimensional way, if that makes sense.
You mean insofar as like being uncomplicated?
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, and like less so in a technical way than in like a mood way.
Sure.
You know what I mean? It feels, to me, it's like a really moving piece of music, but it doesn't feel like conflicted in any way. It feels like unfiltered emotion.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And clear emotion.
Because the nature of the album and the project is intended for children, I think there is an innocence to the sound of it too that is, like you said, sentimental without being like, just taking up too much space like in your mind.
Yeah.
Or in your heart.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The whole album's great, and it's kind of I think in a way that maybe reflects the intended listeners, which were kids, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like less like an album or a track or something, and more like a friend that I spend time with.
Yeah.
And yeah, friend I keep going back to.
That's interesting that that's what this world of stuff is what you are listening to a lot. And I'm curious, do you think that those kinds of ideas are translating in new material that you're writing, or just in working on presenting the music, performing the music, or anything like that?
Yeah, I think so. I think more and more I'm kind of only interested in something that I'm writing if it feels very clearly sentimental. Like I've no interest in like irony. I have no interest in trying to make something intelligent or like clever or whatever you
right.
wanna use. Like for me, if it doesn't hit you in an emotional way,
Mm-hmm.
then I kind of put it to the side.
It's funny that the word sentimental keeps coming up, because I feel like that is not a word that people would often use to describe your band.
Yeah, I agree.
Do you think that's a little bit of misinterpretation, or just you haven't really explored that part of your creative mind yet, or something?
It's a good question. I think that because this band is a band,
Mm-hmm.
and because there isn't like one mind behind it, and we don't present it as such because
Right.
that would be inaccurate, I think people maybe find it more difficult to associate with sentiment or something. But for me, the music that I try to make is sentimental to me, and like I'm a fool for like a sentimental chord progression or
Sure.
melody or something. Like that's the stuff that resonates with me. I think it clearly isn't the only thing that I'm trying to do
Sure.
with my input for Palm. Like I'm equally interested in doing something like very counter to that or disrupting it, but only to further the sentimentality, if that makes sense. So like throwing a wrench in the mechanics, not for the sake of it, but because to me that's like a way to exploit some more sentiment out of it. I don't know if this is making any sense.
No, that
it isn't trying to be clever. It's trying to provoke some kind of emotional resonance.
Right. Do you think? Well, I'm just curious how that happens. I understand the concept of what you're saying, but like, do you think it makes it easier for you to be more genuine about it or something when there's these little like clanks in there to disrupt it?
Maybe it feels more reflective of who I am.
Sure.
Or how I experience being a human being or whatever. Like as much as I like two-dimensional sentimentality, I find that for me it's more like accurate if there's something if there are hiccups in there or something.
Right. Yeah, and the band has its own identity to work within that, it's very distinct sound-wise and structure-wise. So there are those things that, you can or you choose to, I guess, continue the trajectory of those stylistic things or not. But
yeah, definitely. I mean, that's the thing, is that like Palm isn't my band. It's very much our band, and
right.
There's no vision to Palm because I think it's difficult to maintain a cohesive vision amongst four people.
Right.
But to me, or my input to Palm as I see it is to essentially like write ballads and then try, and with the help of my band, like really twist it up.
Wow.
I don't know if they would agree with that. But I really try and write ballads, and or like maybe ballad isn't the right isn't accurate, but like something akin to a ballad, like a
straightforward emotional sort of musical ideas.
Yeah. And I'm like more and more interested in like kind of classical traditions in that way, like ballads and waltzes, and I've always been interested in like love songs and like breakup songs and things like that.
Right.
These kind of like really genred traditions, and I think because they resonate so easily.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that there's so much room to play with kind of twisting those traditions. And I mean, so many bands and musicians have done that for a long time. I don't think it's like an original idea, but I think that we're just like one of many groups trying to do something like that.
Yeah, but the process of orchestrating that is, unique to anybody who does it to an extent. And I don't think anybody would accuse Palm of being over referential of love songs and ballads. The traditional style. But
yeah, I mean, I hope that no one feels like you need to have listened to X, Y, or Z to be able to get Palm or something. Like,
right.
It's really important to me that Palm should, at least in theory, be enjoyable to someone who's never listened to This Heat or Deerhoof or whatever the more kind of immediate associations are or something. But yeah, I think it's I don't know, I tend to try and avoid any writing about my band, but every now and then it's unavoidable, and I'm sometimes surprised by a lack of note about what I consider to be a fairly blatant attempt to write pop music.
Yeah.
And like melodic pop music.
Right. Well, now the people who hear this will be paying more attention to that.
Don't realize that we're just writing ballads with hiccups in them.
There are no messages for me. I'm gonna get my stuff. I'm going to the sea. Already packed. I've left the house. Oh yeah.
Eve's pick was Sea Air by Mikachu and the Shapes. I like that song.
I like it a lot too. It was pretty hard to pick a song because she's done so much.
Very prolific.
Super prolific, and there was no one song that really stood out to choose for the 5, but I chose, this is the last Mikachu and the Shapes record that they put out, and I felt like it was kind of simple and to the point.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think that she really shines on this album in a way that wasn't moving me as much with the other records because it's such a simple instrumentation and her voice has such a different character than on other stuff. It's like lower and she's kind of straining to hit notes and stuff, and it's a very appealing, simple, but also kind of all over the place sound.
I was thinking about, I mean, I love like a lot of the producing she's done for herself or for, she just put out a record with Tirza called Devotion that she came out I think last week.
Right.
She produces on it. But I just figured this was like kind of, you can hear her very clearly on this, and this was kind of like the first Mikachu and the Shapes record that I really connected with, even though I'd listened to the older ones a bunch. Part of the reason I like it so much is because it almost feels like it wasn't supposed to happen.
What do you mean?
I'm pretty sure, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure they didn't want to make another record.
Really?
And didn't like have much prepared, but their drummer kind of like
orchestrated it.
He just recorded with like your Zoom mic there, their rehearsals, and kind of chopped it together.
No way.
And made the record out of their rehearsals.
Crazy.
And I really love how something so like unplanned could be really moving and beautiful, even though it's just recorded with some Zoom mics or in a practice space. Yeah. It's really organic.
Definitely. It's also just really, I mean, I'm really impressed with her whole body of work. Micah Levy, FYI, is the name of the artist, who's the front person of this band and a very prolific and decorated film composer and producer. And it's just cool to have a document of just very, very, very pure music making, pure and simple and unfiltered, especially from this person whose whole career is kind of defined by being hyper filtered in a way, you know?
Yeah, you mean with the film stuff?
With the film stuff, but also the way the other Mikachu records are so kind of like manic in a lot of places, and like people talk about her sampling and how it's this very like everything's kind of chopped together and
Sure.
glitchy sounding almost.
This is pretty like super stripped
Yeah.
down to the basics and really airy but also propulsive at the same time.
Yeah.
And I think this also kind of like shines a light on her strength as a like producer, like an electronic music producer as well, even though it's just like some straight up guitar, keyboard, and drums. I just literally love everything she puts out, and it's also varying but also really focused. Like I really love this record she put out a year or two ago called Remain Calm, which is like a cellist and Mika playing like producing sounds, I think probably through computer. Okay. But it's really, really unpretentious, and you can really hear its influence of like UK garage and hip hop.
Yeah.
I don't know. Everything she does is like very punk, very simple, but really also like honest, rhythmic, and moving.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. How does her influence make its way into what you do? Do you think it does?
I think, I don't know, I've been like a lot more interested in like sampling and recording our practices and putting stuff together. I don't know if that was like based on that, but on her, but I'm, even though I think a lot of people like think our music is like really intricate and tightly wound, I'm so much more inspired by stuff that is like feels like it anyone, I don't know, I'm inspired by stuff that I feel like anyone has access to make.
Totally. Yeah. Kasra was talking about that a little bit too, and how the nature of the project being as completely collaborative as it is sort of a process of like taking very straightforward kind of emotional or narrative or even song structure ideas and filtering it through all four of you to turn it into this thing that is stylistically not as minimal or simple or whatever word you want to use, but there's clearly a lot of parts and a lot of jaggedness that is distinct and characteristic of your band.
Yeah. And I think I really hear that with this band as well. Like I love watching live videos of them. They just feel, I don't know if they're still a project, but they just feel like such a like unique three brains putting weird sounds together, and totally. I can definitely relate to that.
Totally.
I also like really, really love their drummer. He's I think now drumming in Mount Kimby's live band. I don't know, they're all so talented, and like simple ideas but when they come together and with their production, there's like a lot of things you can pull out. Yeah. And I'm like constantly striving to do that.
Yeah, definitely. I think you're pulling it off. Jerry's pick was Nuno Canavaro's Bruma from the album Plux Cuba. Portuguese composer. Jim O'Rourke is a big fan.
Yeah.
How'd you find the album? Do you remember?
Yeah, definitely. Actually, a friend in college showed it to me.
Mm-hmm.
So probably like 6 years ago or something.
Okay.
And he was, it's funny you said Jim O'Rourke. I know he was really into Jim O'Rourke, so
Yeah,
I'm sure that's how he found out about it.
Well, it came out on Jim O'Rourke's Moika label before it was reissued by Drag City.
Right.
And I guess, it was just some random CD that one of his friends had, and this guy no one really knew who he was, and then kind of had this little indie success circuit thing with this album.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. But yeah, I remember like not listening to the first time. I like didn't know how I like couldn't really get down, or I didn't know how I felt about it. Mm-hmm. That song in particular was the one that initially, like I just listened to that song for a while. You know, like when you listen to an album or something that you don't know, but you gravitate towards that one song. Totally. And then after like just listening to that, I started listening to the album, and like just now I like think it's just like a really incredible album, and just something that I like a lot of aspects of this, like the way the whole thing works. It just feels so alien. It's just like so, I don't know, I can't quite put my finger on everything, but it is. I like what happens with it's doing. I don't know.
It's very unique, dreamlike, atmospheric, ambient sort of thing, but not ambient in that you can't really not pay attention to it when it's there.
Yeah,
you know, it's not
totally.
Background music at all.
Yeah, totally. And that's something specifically that I think I appreciate a lot in it. There's a lot of like careful, like, I don't know. It's like listening, like in that song, there's just like all these like really quiet, like just like kind of piano chord that's like, or like it sounds like harper. I don't even know what it is, but just like kind of like follow something like else that's happening, like the I don't know. And there's just like so many little things that are just happening that are like really quiet and just like, but I don't know. I like, I don't know, in terms of like making music and stuff, like thinking more in terms of like elements like that, and with more spaces in like music and stuff. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. So is that sort of something that plays into how you write, or like how you think about your parts and stuff, just very space oriented? Or
I guess now, especially like where we're at a point now when we're working on new material, as we were saying earlier, I'd like to think I've been thinking more about, and especially as we use like different kind of sounds, electronic sounds and things like that. But like I like how it's like electronic but still very acoustic sounding. You know, like and like just how to do that well, and like while obviously rhythmic stuff is very important, and there's a rhythm to the song, but it's obviously not like with like the drums. Like maybe I like that too. I don't know. It's so like nebulous right now. Like what we're doing, what we're gonna do next. So this is just, but it's something like an aspect of something that I've been trying to think about, and like when I'm incorporating, maybe working on new music for Palm.
Yeah, I think a lot of the experimental music that I cherish the most is stuff where both the rhythm and the sound hypernatural almost, like they're literally from the earth, but you take a closer look at both of those things, like the flow and the sounds. You're like, how is this happening? You know?
Yeah.
This is some like laboratory shit.
Yeah, exactly. Or like I haven't done it, but like it would be interesting to try to map out, like for example that song, and just like see, like I don't know, somehow map out the different sounds, just like see how it lands, just like in like a file or something, and just like I don't know. Yeah. Well,
I guess he's a composer.
Yeah.
So he probably had some kind of map.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, but yeah, it's funny because I just don't. I still don't know much about his other music because I just kind of, I don't know. Yeah. Sometimes if there's something I really like, I just like stick to it for a while until like before I move on or something to try to see what else is out there.
Totally. He was in a band called the Delphins, who apparently are well known in Portugal.
Oh. Well.
And another band called Street Kids, which I just really like the name of, but I don't know what either of them are.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a really cool album, and it's makes a lot of sense that Jim O'Rourke is a big fan, because I think he can really get into that world of like creating an atmosphere of sound that feels really natural, even though it's not, and even though it's almost hard to make sense of it all, but has an atmosphericness to it that just is very like settling and easy to grasp.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and it's I don't know. I find the whole album pretty emotional. I like it, just like, but like in a very like not, I don't know. It just, I don't know. It's just very interesting headspace to get into listening to it.
Definitely.
I wish I could describe better, but maybe that's why I love it. I don't know.
Totally. Yeah, I think with a lot of, experimental composery type stuff, that you're supposed to be kept in the dark a little bit about why and how it works, but that is why and how it works.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everybody's alone. Everybody's alone. People talking to me, someone saying so easy to be, but when I learn to be free, I wonder if I'll miss the pain. Everybody's alone. Everybody's alone.
Hugo's track, Everybody's Alone by Neil Young with Crazy Horse from the Neil Young Archives, released in 2009. Sometime between the year 1969 and 1970 is when he recorded it, which is a pretty young era for old Neil.
Yeah.
When did you find this track? Do you remember?
It would have been, I think, in 2014.
Mm-hmm.
I was like moving out of a house that I'd lived at for 3 years.
In Philly?
In upstate New York.
Sure. Yeah.
And I'd like grown up listening to Neil Young. Definitely one of the biggest influences musically in my life, or like most consistent ones.
Right.
There's not a lot of music that I liked when I was a kid that I like just as much now.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I didn't know this song. I know it's on that Archives compilation, but I'm actually like not really familiar with that release. But yeah, so I was moving out of my house, and just like all of this sort of random junk was surfacing that I had to dispose of, a lot of which was not mine. And I found, I don't know, there was just like a pile of blank CDs, and one of them was a mix CD that one of my old housemates had either like made for someone or received. I think based on what was on it, he probably made it.
Funny.
There were a bunch of good songs on there. It was sort of like, I feel like from what I remember, it was like sort of like lesser known songs by like kind of well known artists.
Okay.
Like there was this other song, a Velvet Underground song, like a demo called Prominent Men.
Oh, yeah.
This is like from 65 or
Yeah.
something, and it sounds kind of like a early Bob Dylan style folk song.
Yeah, it's like a way wordier than like Lou Reed usually
Yeah,
is.
totally.
Like
And
he doesn't repeat as much.
yeah, totally. It was very like very versy, but yeah, this was on there, and it kind of like, you know, from the first note, you know that it's Crazy Horse, but I
Sure.
wasn't familiar with the song, and I was just kind of like, wow, how have I never heard that? Like what like Crazy Horse album did I like somehow miss?
Yeah,
and
yeah.
And I found it was on this compilation when I looked it up, but it's, I don't know, there's like a very particular feeling when you like hear something by an artist you're really familiar with, especially like if it's one that you really love and you're not familiar with the song at all, but it's
Totally.
like it has that kind of intense familiarity, and then
Yeah.
if it's like a great song, it can like hit you pretty hard, I guess.
Definitely. Yeah, it's funny too, because it's sound-wise obviously like very characteristically him.
Yeah, and very much like that period too,
yeah.
for sure.
But it's also not characteristic in that he's sort of doing like a more like soulful thing than he ever does in a way. Like, you know what I mean? Like
it's like a pretty like bouncy or kind of like playful melody that's like not, I don't know, like there's it reminds me of some of that, or like I guess some of that like early Crazy Horse stuff was kind of like R&B sort of like soul influence.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like it's, I definitely know what you mean about that kind of like.
And like with Neil singing, there's like a little thing even before the guitar solo where he does a little like James Brown impression. So he's like, yeah. Like it just kind of gets out of the very like nature of the song.
Yeah, he does like a little bit of scatting.
Yeah, he scats out of it a little bit, which is like, I can't think of anywhere else where you hear him do that.
Yeah, I mean, I can't off the top of my head either, but it's interesting to me that this was just like throwaway for him.
Right.
I guess, I don't know. I'd never heard the song before.
Yeah.
I guess few people had before this like box set
Yeah.
came out, but it's like, you know, it's like it fits right in there with the other stuff. But
Yeah, it's funny because it makes you think about like how, you know, because especially the Crazy Horse stuff, but all of Neil's stuff is kind of like so teetering on the line of like, is this amazing? Is this horrible? Sort of.
I mean, definitely he's going out on a limb with just like the really with how like direct it is lyrically.
Right.
I mean, everything about his music to me is like so direct, which is why I think he was so important. You
Totally.
know? Like his guitar, his style of guitar playing is like, you know, I think a lot of people at the time were like, what the fuck is it? You know,
Right.
like it's like, it very like, he definitely like lets it hang out, like just like the way that he plays, but also just like, I don't know, something about the lyrics is just like, it's, you know, like anyone could like come up with the lyric, everybody's alone,
Sure.
or like, I love you so much I can hardly stand it, but something about just like the whole package is really like impactful to me. And also just like, I guess like the lyrics, I mean it's everything for me that I, you know, that I connect with the song, but like the just something about like the nihilism of like the main sentiment, like competing with like the sort of like the kind of like tender kind of like love song sentiment in there is like pretty striking to me. I don't know, it's like usually you don't hear a song that's like about how like everyone is, you know, by themselves, and that's kind of like, that's sort of the end of it, but also like I'm in love with you, and like you know, it's kind of like a contradiction that I think is like very relatable or something. I don't know.
Yeah, it's funny too, just with the performances, like thinking about how this song didn't make the cut for whatever album it was intended for, if it was intended for one, and, you know, didn't see the light of day until 30 years later. It's like, when you have a band like Crazy Horse, and you have just like really weird, really great, but kind of amateurish guitar solos and drumming, and the drummer here just like misses so many like hits. It's like all over the place, and but it's really like steady at the same time. It's funny to think about, like, okay, why didn't this one make the cut? Like, was it it's not noticeably any like less okay than any
well,
of the
it's like
others.
when your aesthetic is like janky on purpose. It's like what's like the sweet spot, or like the right balance of like totally falling apart and like really sort of like
making it work, like
with like
gelling.
Yeah, exactly. And but it's like, I don't know, I feel like all the contradictions that I think of when I think of Neil Young are there, just like what I was saying about the lyrics, but also just like the kind of like there's like a certain like machismo to like, you know, he's like really dirty guitar tone. He does this like really kind of like obnoxious like little like pick scrape thing at the beginning, but it's, you know, but he's also just like bearing his soul, and he's clearly like a sensitive guy, and it's just like, I don't know, I feel like everything's there for me in terms of like the ridiculousness or the absurdity of like using rock music to like express yourself, or kind of like the inherent frustration with like wanting to be the center of attention, but also just like wanting to like deal with these like whatever demons or like personal feelings that you may have that are not quite as as like blasé or confident as like as just kind of like the air that performers tend to like give off when they're, especially like in this period of time. I feel like rock music was so like masculine and just like
and egocentric
and just about, you know, it's like showmanship and showing off. And I feel like Neil Young, like, you know, and a lot of that aspect of rock music is like bullshit and like really sucks, but, you know, like a lot of it is just you know, like connects with people nonetheless. And I feel like Neil Young, like, really, in a way that a lot of artists, like, failed, like, walk that line between just kind of, like, the absurdity of, like, popular music, especially, like, rock music, and, like, the grandiosity with just, like, the real possibility for, like, catharsis, like, self-expression, like, you know, exploration of, like, your, like, inner life or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think the reason why Neil gets such a pass with, you know, avoiding being machismo or maudlin or egotistical is because he is so not delicate with anything, and it's so just kind of upfront, both musically, because everyone's sort of like, you know, sort of sloppy, sort of janky, but perfect and great, and because his ideas are so, he has a way with words, but like the way a really like emotionally developed fourth grader would have.
I was just about to say, a lot of like his lyrics sort of like feel like they were written by someone before they like hit puberty and became like self-conscious, or like, you know what I mean?
Totally.
Like he really, you know, like he bears it all in this way that's like seems like either like super confident and self-assured, or just like super delicate and insecure, and like I don't know, it's just like there are a lot of feelings in there.
It's honest.
And so it was like sort of, I don't want to say it was like an arbitrary selection, but it was kind of like, I don't know.
Any Neil would do the trick almost.
Yeah, but this was like, I feel like this hit me in a way where it was like, I was already like familiar with like most of like what I would end up hearing by him at this point. And then like years after, kind of like, I don't know, like his records were like really important to me in high school. And so it's like, you know, I'm sure you know that feeling, and like most like music fans would know the feeling of like of excitement when you discover, like when you think there's like not any more of something, and then you're like, oh, there's this like song I've never heard, like, and it does just what all these other songs I love does, but like, you know, in a way that only this song does it, or whatever.
It's almost like a really close friend telling you like they were adopted or something after years and years, you know, like the big secret being revealed, and it's like exciting, but you're also it's exciting.
A strange analogy, but I'll roll with it.
Vogue, Dancing the Night Away, from the Canadian duo, 1980. This song, it's really good, and it's really, it's not a very conventional, like, disco song in a lot of ways. It's like a little slower, and they're like weird instrumental things that happen. And yeah, I don't know. The vocals are like not really super as present as you would think they would be or something.
Mm-hmm.
And like the performance is sort of restrained almost.
They're not like necessary. To me, it kind of like sounds like ABBA or something almost, except like without the kind of like virtuosic sort of singing that I associate with that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, it's sort of like breathy in a way that feels like accidental or something.
You can see that.
Where'd you guys find the track?
Our last American tour was in March, and we brought a friend with us, Flo, and she played it one time after a show in the van, and then we continued to play it like every time we were in the van at night, pretty much, and it just became like kind of the anthem. And like, I don't know, it's really fun when you find like the track or the tracks on tour.
Totally.
Yeah, it's definitely like, it also, yeah, it's one of those things where I feel like, at least for me, whenever I hear it now, it takes me like immediately to just like being in the van and like that like spring and just
being really excited,
being in a good mood, like being like pretty tired, like kind of drunk and just like.
Yeah, I had a feeling it was a van jam with a story behind it. But yeah, no, that's real. Like, that's a really important way to engage with music, I think. Like, having it bring back just memories of a specific time and place, even if there's nothing about the music exactly that, like, reflects that time and place, other than that it was there.
It's also kind of hard to listen communally to music that's like not loud and dancey, or like it's difficult to listen to like full albums of like quieter stuff because the van is so loud, and listening to music like this just can like put everyone in a positive mood.
Yeah, I think sometimes people who like music and think about music a lot like tend to sometimes be guilty of over intellectualizing it. Like, if a track makes you feel good, then it's a good track.
Totally.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, we just chose this song,
yeah.
like, because it's just a banger. Like,
It makes me feel good
to
to listen to it, and the Movements track I chose like makes me feel good to listen. Like, music I like makes me feel good in a way that like is kind of beyond like explanation or something.
Yeah, I feel like that's kind of been a theme of each conversation I've had with each one of you, is like really valuing just, you know, pure expression in music and unfiltered and sort of not challenging for the sake of being challenging, or, you know, distinct or unique or whatever for the sake of doing it. Just sort of openness and unfiltered sound ideas and expression.
Totally.
Yeah, I feel like so much of like connecting with the emotional content in music too is like to do with context and stuff. Like with this, I don't know, maybe I'm like backtracking a little bit, but like thinking about listening to music in the van, like I feel like we all kind of have our own sort of like personal tastes, like things that we gravitate towards more than other things. We also have a lot of like sort of like interests and influences in common, but it's like kind of like, I don't know, we all kind of take turns playing music in the van, and sometimes it's like hard. I'm sure everyone knows the that like self-conscious feeling of like ending up with the aux cable and like you're like not necessarily going to play something that you would listen to on your headphones. And so you're doing like a little bit of like curating, like trying to read the room or whatever. And so like with this, it was just like having like another person who is kind of like outside of our like van DJing dynamic, just like throw something on that they wanted to listen to.
Yeah.
It was like a very like good like set of circumstances for us all to just kind of like
Totally
want to hear what was being played.
It's easy to unite behind loving the person who's outside of the band who's still
totally.
on the trip.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's like it's really nice to have someone who like is just like on vacation, like bring the being on vacation vibe into the van, and this song very much like feels like that to me.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Do you guys feel challenged by the idea that maybe people perceive your project differently than how you intend it to be perceived? Because there's a lot of stylistic stuff that kind of is in this world of music that, you know, is possibly more challenging or jagged sounding, that the sound of the band sort of fits into, and maybe there's
Like our selections don't reflect that.
I don't know, yeah, maybe not completely. I mean, I think obviously like anybody who's making great music is like listening to all kinds of music, but yeah, it's sort of like something that you were saying is like you feel a concern that the band isn't interpreted as like trying to make like highly relatable popular music, and I'm just curious if that's sort of like a communal feeling of.
I mean, I think that ultimately, like, it's a fool's errand to like try and make something and then be like overly concerned with how it's perceived.
Definitely.
Like, you have no control over that.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I can only speak for myself, but I think it's flattering that like anyone has like any feelings or like thoughts about our band at all.
Of course,
as
yeah,
opposed
yeah.
to ignoring it completely. And even if those feelings are negative ones, like arguably that's better than like no one caring at all. I mean, we could have like I imagine there's like we could have done this and everyone could have chosen tracks that we love that sound much more like Palm sounds.
Yeah, sure.
And we do, like, I love Captain Beefheart and Deerhoof and This Heat and the things that Palm sound so much closer to probably, but I'm not overly concerned about it, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Everything is sort of, when we write, it's like, it's pretty unconscious, and like, we write sort of like pretty like in fragmented parts, sort of, and so the way I interpret it is sort of like based on each fragment in a way. It's like, oh, this rhythm like reminds me of like this weird electronic song or something. I never like, I'm only thinking of the whole once it's like complete.
Interesting.
But everything is like kind of on a song by song basis, so I don't feel uncomfortable at all about like how people interpret our music. So I don't know how to interpret it, and I feel like none of us are trying to like repeat ourselves in any way. So
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think we're kind of trying to scratch a lot of musical itches at once when we write together, and like what that is for us as individuals is like often not the same, or at least not totally the same as the other members. But you know, I think we try also to like give each other space and not like stifle each other's desire to explore what we want to explore as individuals within the project. And so it's kind of like it's pretty hard to know like how something's going to come out like with that model. Right. It's kind of like we all throw what we have at the wall, and then you know, sometimes it ends up sounding like something that already exists, which is like doesn't like come as a surprise.
Sure,
like,
of course.
You know, like
that's how music works.
Because it's music. Yeah, exactly. And sometimes people like come up to us and are like, "Oh, your music reminds me of this or that thing," but it doesn't feel any better or worse when the thing is something that I like than if it's something that I don't like, because either way it's just kind of like, it's just like, it makes sense, you know what I mean? It's like, it's not, it kind of should sound different to different people. And like, I feel like when I feel like what we're doing is successful, it's when that happens, when people like get what they want to get out of it, and that can be whatever for them based on their experiences and their background and stuff. And like, there are definitely like sort of like different types of bands that we get compared to, and like some are more stuff that we like than others. But it's like, you know, like if a 60-year-old man at our show is like, I loved it, sounds like King Crimson or something. It's like, you know, I used to like King Crimson when I was like 14, 15. I was like really into them and haven't really like revisited it since. I don't know that any of the others really like care for that band one way or another, but it's like, if that's that person's like reference point, like that's what it's going to sound like to them, and that's how it works. And I think we all like are at peace with that idea, you know.
Definitely. Yeah, it's so much cooler than just being compared to like one decade or one other band.
Absolutely.
You know?
Yeah, totally. Because for every person that comes up and is like, you guys sound like Dirty Projectors or like Grizzly Bear or something, there's also someone who's like, oh, do you guys really like Bossa Nova or like something else that, I don't know.
Right.
It's like
filtered through their own personal experience and knowledge of music.
Yeah, exactly. Because we're like 4 individuals at the end of the day, so it's not like we're all like coming from one place, and it's like, it's not like supposed to be anything or sound like anything. Like we didn't know when we started, and we still don't know like what our music's gonna sound like before we write it. So it's not like any interpretation of it is like more validating or less validating than any other.
Right. So I guess you can't give me any hint about what the third record's gonna be like
Still
until
trying to figure that out ourselves.
Yeah.
Cool.
Maybe like this track though,
Like
Dancing
like the
in
Vogue
Underwear.
track.
oh yeah,
Hopefully.
Yeah.
that'd be an
It'll-
exciting
It'll be
change
these
of
5
pace.
tracks mixed into one.
It could. That'd be sick.
I think maybe it will, whether or not you intend it.
If we do that, we'll have to name the album The 5.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But someone's inevitably gonna hear it and be like, damn, these guys must really love Justin Bieber. And Justin Bieber's got some tracks, by the way.
Oh yeah,
I'll go on the record.
completely agree. So you have a few shows in the fall, writing the new album. Anything else on the horizon, or sort of taking some serious time to
Taking
be
some
at home and
serious
write
time.
and not be on the road for a second?
Yeah.
Trying to deprogram a little bit.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you guys
Thank you.
for your
Thanks.
time and your picks. Palm, great band. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening to The Five. I'm your host, Ross Wallace Chait.
You can find me on SoundCloud at soundcloud.com/totalheat or on Instagram at this_is_rot. Peace and love.